Hey, solopreneurs, Gabe here. Today we have a special guest by the name of Doc Wright. Doc owns a company called The Wright Edge. And if you go to his website, thewrightedge.com, you're going to see some amazing woodwork. This guy is an artist. He combines wood and metal and puts together these amazing pieces of furniture and decorations and things that you can then see in hotels and corporations around the world, as well as if you go to his website, you'll see stuff that has been put into people's homes. I'm really excited for you to hear his story because it's a story that a lot of us solopreneurs identify with. I'm sick of what I'm doing. I'm going to make a change, or I'm going to try something. And the next thing you know, a business just comes out of this try or this experiment or this take a chance on something. So I really hope you enjoy this episode with Doc Wright. Thanks a lot for listening again, and I truly appreciate it. Doc, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Gabe. Looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, I got to say, when we first met, we had a Zoom call, kind of like an introduction. Ray introduced us, and I was like, man, I got to get this guy on my podcast. This guy's story is amazing. And the work that you are doing with your company is just it's outrageous. I think it's crazy. It's art with wood and metal, and it's just amazing. And so what I'm going to urge anybody that's listening to do before you go too far, hit pause on this podcast. Go to his website, go to thewrightedge.com and look at the stuff that Doc is putting out there. It is absolutely amazing, the work that he does. So take a minute, go do that. And when you come back, you're going to hear the story of how this whole thing got started. And I think you'll really enjoy it. So that being said, Doc, the story is, how did you get started in this whole crazy thing of wood and art coming together with producing the things that you do?
Blind luck, kind of. I was a geologist in the oil and gas industry and was pretty unhappy with how things were going. So I was working 2 weeks on, 1 week off on a rotational schedule, no travel, just in the office. And where I lived in Dallas, it's kind of a really old neighborhood. So, like, my house was built in 1929. Had a neighbor, kind of had a dilapidated deck. So I was like, hey, you just stock me with beer, buy the materials, and I'll just redo your deck. So I did, and a couple of weeks later, a good friend of mine, Nate Forty, who owns Blue Bonnet Construction here in Dallas, hit me up and was like, "Hey man, I just bought this dope table from Crate and Barrel. I'd really like a live edge bench. Think you can make one?" Never woodworked a day in my life, and I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm pretty sure I can make anything." So I went online and looked up and found 3 places I could buy live edge wood in Dallas, and their pricing was just gaudy. So I went on Craigslist and I found Andy Hood, who is now our welder. We actually built our shop on his 8 acres, about 30 minutes south of Dallas in Red Oak. Met him on December 6th of 2016, bought 3 pieces of wood from him, did the bench, did a coffee table, then I did a dining table and like 2 or 3 smaller pieces. And towards the end of January, I think, um, so I'd only been woodworking like almost 2 months when an interior designer for a custom home builder out in Lubbock found me, asked me to bid on a 14 by 5 foot walnut conference room table. And when she reached out, I was like, verbatim, I was like, you realize I'm not a business. I'm just some schmuck in his garage, right? And she laughed and she's like, we know, but we saw the table. We really liked it. We're a Texas proud company. We want somebody from Texas to, potentially bid and get the job. Okay, so I hit up a good friend of mine and I was like, hey, how do I write an invoice? Had no clue. And so he threw something together for me in Microsoft Excel, sent in the estimate. A couple days later, she came back to me asking me to bid on 5. They wanted all 5 different shapes, sizes, all 5 different species. So I called Andy because he was harvesting, milling, and drying all domestics from his, family's property in East Texas. So I called him. I was like, think you can find that much wood? Yeah, yeah, sure. So I sent in the bid for all 5 tables, and about a week later, much to my surprise, I got a call going, "Hey, where do we send the deposit check to?" And it was for 134,000. So it was a conversation I really couldn't have with anybody because how do you explain to somebody that you've only been doing this one thing for about 2.5 months, and a six-figure opportunity kind of just falls in your lap? So it was just decision time. So at the time, I think I was like 32 or 33, not married, don't have kids. Said, fuck it. If I'm going to take a chance, now's the time to do it. So went to work, cashed out my stock, waited till my bonus hit my account, put in my 2 weeks. They just told me to leave.
Wow. So I got to dig a couple of things out of that. First of all, you got to understand, I am not a woodworker. I've never worked with wood. So what does live edge wood? What does that mean?
It means like, if you go to Home Depot, you get dimensional lumber, like 2x4s, 2x6s,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. Live edge wood is actually where you're taking the entire diameter of the tree and slabbing it out 2 to 3 inches thick. So the live edge is actually the shape of the tree on the outside.
Ah, so that's when you see wood that's got curvature and different things on it. That's what live edge means.
Yes, sir. Correct.
Okay, all right. Like I said, I'm not a woodworker, so I don't know these things. But I mean, any solopreneur that's listening to this is sitting here going, "Holy crap!" The guy just gets going, doesn't really know what he's doing, but he's got $130,000 bid that you got. First of all, what was going through your mind when that happened? I mean, that monster bid that you got.
Honestly, it was the perfect storm because I was so unhappy with work because in the oil industry, being a geologist, I don't have a master's, so I was kind of looked at like an idiot. Even though I was leading intern field trips, I was training all the new hires, I always had the heaviest workload, and I had been there for almost 4 years. And I'm watching everybody around me get promoted to the point I got told I was too good at my job for me to do anything else. So I was incredibly frustrated and kind of had already started testing the waters, seeing what else was out there. So when this fell in my lap, it was perfect timing. I was ready to go, and this was more than enough money to be like, you know what, this is not like a small $5,000 deal for some family friends or some friends from college. Like this is a legit big time deal. So that part of the mentality was already there. I was ready to go, and then it was the reality of walking away from everything on how my generation was raised. You go to high school, you graduate, you go to college, you get the degree, you get the job, you stay to get the 401k or the pension, you buy the house, you get the car. And at the time, it was like I'd already accomplished all that, making more money than either of my parents at 32. And I was like, this is it? Well, that's kind of disappointing. So that mentality was there right out of the gate. But then it was like, oh, shit, I actually got to figure out how I'm going to do this. And it was a steep learning curve, I'll tell you that much.
So what was the first thing you did? I mean, there had to be some money things that you had to put in place. You had to start kind of you almost had to get yourself legit so that you could start to move forward. So
I
did you
had
go
to.
did you just, yeah. So what were your first steps that you did? Did you go set up a corporation? Did you go set up did you set up business accounts? I mean, how did you take those first couple steps once you realized, holy crap, I'm in this for the real?
That's exactly what I did the first 2 weeks upon quitting the job and getting that deposit check. Um, I actually had to ask them to post date the check so I could buy an LLC. That way they could send the check to the actual LLC. Once I got the paperwork for the LLC, went to Chase Bank, opened up a business checking account with that deposit. Reached out to a good friend of mine who is kind of a serial entrepreneur. He's owned a bunch of gyms and photography studios. He was the one who helped me write the invoice. So at that point, I was like, I need a website. So I paid him to set me up the most basic website on Squarespace. Um, at the time, just started a different Gmail account. Just it was all starter stuff, just to semi look legit on paper. Through him, I got connected with an accounting firm that also does bookkeeping, so I didn't have to worry about any of that. And they were super cheap, like $250 a month. So I'm not going to pay attention to my accounts. That's not the focus. So I had first 2 weeks was just setting the business up.
Okay. So you started getting everything dialed in for the first 2 weeks. And I got to go back. I mean, you were a geologist before, and did you have any prior like major woodworking experience before doing this, or was this, how'd you learn this stuff?
Never woodworked a day in my life. I grew up doing a lot of construction with my dad. And so I'm very familiar with tools in general. Woodworking tools is just, once you've worked with tools, you understand if you're trying to do something, there is a specific tool out there for it. So at that point, it was like, okay, went out and bought a track saw, had a couple routers. I figured out, how to flatten a slab, setting up a router jig and a router sled, which is all manual labor. It sucks. And then just, doing some Googling on, okay, how do you sand stuff? Well, you start with a low grit, work up to a high grit. Okay, what types of finishes are there? Well, luckily for me, Andy had a, Fuji Semi Pro sprayer, which is like a $300 sprayer. And he was like, yeah, I spray lacquer. Looks like I'm spraying lacquer at first. And, I kind of followed his lead on that. But at the time, this was right before woodworking really started getting popular again. So there really weren't that many YouTube videos or sources to try to figure out how to do some of this stuff. It was literally trial and error. And I messed up a lot of pieces just trying to figure stuff out, like test pieces and working through problems like how to do joinery. And it took me, out of the 5 tables, it took me until the third or fourth table to realize the first two were kind of crappy. And that was the job that we learned what not to do and what to do. That was our litmus test because, about a year later, we had to go back and replace 2 of those tables because they were just not up to snuff. But that's where I think a lot of entrepreneurs kind of get messed up in the head is they're too afraid to fail rather than just jumping in, figuring it out. Yeah, you may have to come out of pocket a couple $1,000 to fix the first things, but as long as your clients are happy, I just don't see the fear.
Interesting. And that fear plays a huge part in a lot of people's success or lack of success. Some can overcome that fear and continue on, and others are just they're paralyzed from fear and they don't move forward. So was there any background in business that you might have had from college, or was there anything that kind of taught you some of the basics on how to figure out what to do business wise?
No, sir. Strictly scientist in college, geology and chemistry. Never really cared to get into business. It never fascinated me. And then once I started this, it was just dive in head first, try to learn as much as I possibly can, and talk to people who have done this to try to get some guidance. That was all basic stuff, like how to set up a business account, how to buy an LLC. And then my accountant's talking to me, do we file as an S Corp or do we keep it an LLC? Depending on the tax situation, do we file as a C Corp? And I was like, well, what's the difference? Like, well, a C Corp means you still own the company, but you don't. You own all the shares of the company versus an S Corp, sole proprietorship. The differences between that. I'm like, okay. And over the last 4.5 years, it's just been consistently learning and upping my game in terms of business, how to write contracts, how to get in with big corporate jobs, the insurance side, everything. It's just, if you're not learning and growing daily, you're dying.
No, I totally agree. So, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned along the way of making this transition to solopreneurship?
I would say this is going to go in 2 phases. The first phase is the functional business itself, the woodworking. The second phase is strictly the business side. When I first started out, I had a good friend who is an entrepreneur who owns Compete Every Day. Now he does motivational speaking and writes some books. And he was kind of my mentor for the first 6 months. And a lot of it was just basic advice kind of stuff. And then it very quickly just, I don't want to say I outgrew it, but it just started becoming non applicable. So I walked away from that. And I would say one of the biggest lessons I've learned on the business side: filter out the noise. Don't always ask for advice. Like, talk to people, get some ideas, some outside of the box ideas. But at the end of the day, trust your gut. Nobody's going to run your business better than you. You know the insides and outs better than anybody. So mostly just listen to yourself, have confidence in your decisions, and live and die on that sword. Um, that's been a big one. There's a lot of ins and outs in that, but the woodworking side was understanding that in order to produce high quality stuff, you have to have the right tools and the right machinery. Because once you understand time is money, yeah, this sander may cost a sixth of this other sander, but it saves me 3 hours per top. Well, you average that out over a month at $150 an hour versus a year, you're losing a lot of money just to save a few pennies on a sander. So just kept upping and upping and upping the game until, yeah, we put it all together.
Interesting. So, what were some of the? I mean, those are some of the lessons that you've learned. How about maybe some of the biggest challenges when you switched over from the employee to now, solopreneur, employer type of person? What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced along the way?
Utilizing my time correctly is a big one. Um, so once I got done that very first job, it was all of about like 6 to 8 months. Like we landed that in February and we did the install September, October-ish. So towards the end of that, right when we got done the install, I just kind of had that oh shit moment of now I have to figure out how to continue to bring in business. That was the steepest learning curve because we're not a t-shirt company to where we're buying stuff, we're selling finished products. We always wanted to go custom. So how do we attract those type of clientele? How do we get in with, more residential? How do we get in with corporate? How do we get in with hotels and resorts? Figuring all that, figuring all that out was the hardest and biggest learning curve. And there was a lot of sleepless nights of just pure anxiety trying to figure that out.
So, how did you figure it out? I mean, what did you do to get yourself into hotels and resorts, into more custom homes, things like that? How did you do? How'd you go about doing that?
So the interior designer for that first build, when we got that done, it just kind of hit me. Well, she's an interior designer. She's the one who reached out. So I went on Google and I just started typing in, hotel remodels, resort remodels, and, just kind of going down that rabbit hole until I started finding out there's a lot of interior design firms who have the resume I want to have. So I reached back out to her and I was like, hey, how does this go? And she's like, just email them or call them and try to go into their office and give a presentation. Okay. So slap together a very piss poor portfolio where they do not exist anymore. They've all been burned because nobody ever needs to see that. And just cold called and scheduled a presentation, went in there with some wood samples and a crappy portfolio. Kind of, I'm very comfortable in front of people speaking because my last job I had to give company wide presentations and just started going out to interior design firms. And turns out Dallas, Texas has the third highest concentration of interior design firms next to LA and New York. So being in Dallas was very opportunistic for me. And so for the first 2 years, we were pretty much making strictly for hospitality and corporate.
Interesting. And so, what did you learn? I'm struck by how simple it was that she said. Now, I know simple does not mean easy, but I'm struck by how simple. She says, "Well, just send them an email or give them a phone call. See if you can give them a presentation." Sometimes we make things too hard. I know for years, when I was building my business, I was constantly trying to figure out what the next easiest thing to do, and frankly, the simplest thing, which wasn't always easy, was just picking up the phone and calling people or approaching them saying, hey, can I just show you what I do? So really what you did is you just reached out to them and said, let me show you what I do.
Pretty much. That's all I could do. I didn't know what our target audience was at the time. I didn't know really what kind of products we were going to be able to deliver outside of like tables. But because of that, in the beginning, we landed a handful of jobs that we honestly had no business landing. They were way out of our purview. They were a big risk, but it allowed us to get, a few JW Marriott's and the Ritz Carlton in St. Thomas on our resume. And once that resume started building, which gave us more clout, more confidence in presentations, more confidence dealing with, these clientele, it just came down to that, you know, how much do you believe in what you're doing? Are you willing to put it all on the line? And for us, that's never been a problem because between Andy and myself, we operate completely differently. How we look at things, I'm more math, science, numbers, geometry, trig. He's a big old East Texas redneck. He's on his hands and knees drawing chalk lines on the ground. But you put the two of us in the same room, we had every bit of confidence between the two of us. We can figure anything out.
That's fantastic. So I'd like to twist this just a little bit and change the conversation just a little bit and go down the road of what was like the best job, and you don't have to tell me the location of the job to protect confidentiality, but like what was the best job that you did? I mean, what was that story? And then maybe give me the other side of it. What was the worst job you did and the biggest lesson you learned from that worst job?
It's funny you asked that because both of those are the exact same job.
Okay.
We got approached for it was the first Delta by Marriott built in Texas, and it was up in Allen, Texas, and went into that meeting, had no idea what it was, and it ended up being like 1,800 square feet of decorative wall. And three of the four owners were there. The design firm was there. Architects were there. And this was when we were less than 2 years old. So a little over a year and a half old, doing this full time. And the scope of that job was so unbelievably massive. It was just, I talked to Andy, I showed him the designs. I was like, think we can pull this off? He was like, pretty confident. Okay. So at that time, literally the next day, we were flying out to Los Angeles to meet a middleman importer for exotic wood because harvesting, milling, and drying ourselves it was too much for a two-man operation. And we just could not keep up with building the inventory and doing all the work ourselves, making this stuff. So when we went out there, it was literally the day after. So when we were there, I was like, hey, got this crazy job. I'm going to bid on it. Can you get me 421 8-foot Perota 4x4s? He was like, yeah, we can do that. So you know how much 4x4s are costing now. It's roughly similar to what we paid. So ordered that. I mean, overall, just the four separate walls, I want to say just material cost was about $80,000 just for materials. And then it was time and labor. So we landed that job officially February of 2019, and we turnkeyed December 8th later that year. So, I mean, it was every bit of a 10-month long project, and it sucked. Like, once we were in it, and this still to this day is our litmus test on stress because neither of us, even though like we're pretty smart guys, the logistics of it, I had no clue walking into, and it was a rude slap in the face. It was overwhelming to say the least. About three-quarters of the way through, we weren't sure we were going to pull it off, and we did. Much to our surprise, like we pulled it off, and they actually ended up ordering a big art piece, four massive benches, a computer desk, a hostess stand that weighed like 2,000 pounds, two giant sliding barn doors that were 12 feet tall, a few other art pieces, and then like a 3,000-pound root ball with a half-inch piece of glass right in the lobby. I mean, the overall scope of that job ended up being about $300,000, and we turnkeyed everything on December 8th. And when they had the grand opening in April, we were asked to be a part of it, and the GC company was there, and they were like, "Hey, man, we actually all had cash bets. None of us thought you were going to pull this off. So, cheers to you guys." So it was the best because we took the challenge on and we pulled it out of our butts. The worst was that was a miserable, like the last 6 months were just miserable.
What was miserable about it? Was it the time? Was it what caused it to be miserable?
A lot of it was the time, and the logistics of, because the walls had to come in as panels of just the steel. And then once those were installed, then we had to bring the wood in and do like all the decorative, placing of the wood and just flattening every all 421 4x4s. And there's no fast way to do it. And then getting the design down with the architects, being on site to install it. While on top of that, while all that is going on, we had like 5 other jobs going on for hotels and resorts. And I mentioned, learning how to write contracts, because during this time, steel tariffs from Mexico hit. So now steel jumped up by like 12%. And then we had 3 jobs going out to other hotels that were crated, ready to ship out in August. And all 3 got delayed by 2 months at the exact same time. So I was expecting to get in about like $50 to $60,000. Well, now it's delayed. We just got hit with the steel tariffs, and business didn't have any money to do it. So that's when I was like, had to did some drinking and some thinking, and I was like, you know what? There's a quote, Terry Brands, who is, you know, 2-time world champ in wrestling. He's the assistant coach at Iowa. His twin brother's a head coach. He always says, you get what you earn. So how much do I believe in what I'm doing? So I actually cashed out my 401k to keep the business afloat. And that taught me a very valuable lesson on writing contracts to say, we don't get paid when it's shipped out. We get paid when we're done. We're not paying for your delays. Big lesson learned. So just the smorgasbord of everything felt like a tornado.
That's amazing. Yeah. So all of that coming at you was just like a major weight on your shoulders. So you get through that. So that's the best job and the worst job. And your biggest lesson learned out of that is write good contracts and cover your backside, is what it sounds like to me.
Write good contracts, cover your backside. That also allowed me to really really started allowing me to have good foresight on projects and what certain projects are going to kind of take. But because of that job, it has also let me take a step back and be like, even though we're happy we did it and we're very proud of the final product, we need to stay in our lane a little bit more. That's not our type of job going forward. We just don't have the manpower, or yeah, basically we just don't have the manpower or the space at the time to handle that job plus 6 others. It just became too much to handle for, a small startup. But because of that job, one of the owners, Carrie Burden, took a real big shining to Andy and myself because we were different than everybody else there. And when that job was getting close to done, he was like, "Hey, how long have y'all been in business?" I was like, "Less than 2 years." And he was just asking questions. So he actually set me up a meeting with his personal financial advisor, who set me up a meeting with an attorney. He called a meeting with a CPA and a new bookkeeping company. Basically, Carrie held my hand in transitioning from a startup to a real functioning business. So because we actually pulled that off, it did make an impression. And that changed a lot.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so you have now transitioned into a real business. And so when did you start the business again? What year?
February of 2017.
Okay, so you got a few years in and then COVID hits. So talk to me about how COVID has affected your business. What happened with you with COVID?
Oh, yeah, the COVID stories. When at the beginning of that year, my dad lives in Japan, so we had started hearing rumors about COVID and, things are going to start get bad. So when every state locked down in March, we had 4 corporate contracts worth a little over $200,000 cancel, not delay, not, hey, we'll pick this up in 6 months or whatever, straight up cancel. So we had no work on the books for the entire second quarter. Yeah. So that's when I because of that, like 3 days later, I decided to take a road trip. We had nothing to do. So I just wanted to get out of town and drove to Chicago, saw some friends, drove back through Tennessee, did a lot of thinking. And that's actually on that road trip was, well, these interior design firms are canceling projects. I'm hearing from my brand rep that a lot of the designers are getting put on furlough. So the hospitality side of things are probably going to be shut down for the rest of the year. And at the time, we had started doing some big time work for direct to corporate. So no interior design firms, just direct to corporate, as well as our residential side started picking up. So just the writing was very clear on the wall. I need to dramatically start focusing on residential. Well, how do we do that? So in the past year leading up to that, I had interviewed a handful of marketing firms, an advertising firm, and 2 PR firms, and nobody could tell me anything that I haven't already tried or said no to. Because of our pricing, we're not priced for 90% of the general public. We're not going to be sold in stores. We're not reselling our stuff. How can we go A to B? And at that time on that road trip, I just randomly got connected with a girl I went to college with. I saw on her Facebook, she does some digital, not marketing, but marketing materials. So I reached out to her to redo and revamp our portfolio. And she did that and she killed it. And then turns out she's business partners with Ray Cornell, who owns Cornell Copywriting. So she introduced me to Ray. Ray and I had a very honest conversation, and she was the first marketing company that was like, yeah, ads in ad space are not going to help you out. We need to focus on purely SEO and directing people to your website. So we've been working with Ray for a little over a year now, and it has been 100% game changer. So once I got started connected with Ray, third quarter started picking up massively. Fourth quarter, we ramped up hard, and then we came out of the gates flying in 2021. We have only had about 1 week off since January, and it has been just blowing and going to the point when we didn't have any of that work all second quarter. We were like, well, shit, what are we going to do? So coming out of the gates flying hot this year, I've already had to pull the trigger. We begin moving into our new 5,000 square foot space in the design district to combine the wood side of the business and the showroom, have one central location so I can be at the same place at the same time. Metal shop is still going to stay here, but we can't keep up with production right now. And a large part of that is because we got hooked up with Ray.
That's amazing. And for those of you listening, there is a podcast episode with Ray, and she talks about how to improve your content. And I actually didn't realize when I had first brought Doc on that he was had that much of results from working with Ray. So for those of you, please check out that episode that Ray is on and reach out to her. She is fantastic. She does a great job. So that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And a big thing that I want to say to anybody listening, having a really good professional website with good SEO is worth its weight in gold. Spend the money. It will make the biggest difference to your business no matter what it is, because your website is a direct representation of you and the quality of work that you can produce, whatever it is. Spend the money on a good website.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I completely agree. And her website designer does a fantastic job. Now, did they design yours as well, or did they just came in with the marketing?
They just came in with the SEO and the digital marketing. The people who developed my website is a good friend of mine, Tori, who owns Hooked on Code. And I connected her and Ray, and now those two are thick as thieves.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome.
I do too.
So we started talking about money, and this is a podcast about money. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition to the money questions of the in the episode. And so I have 3 questions I ask everybody regarding money. And the first question is what is the smartest thing you've ever done regarding money? And tell me that story.
Smartest thing I've done with money since the business or just in general in life?
Let's go general in life. And then actually tell me business too. I always like to hear both.
Smartest thing I've done with money personally was when I was working in the oil and gas industry. My dad basically told me that, hey, you're about to start making too much money. So you either need to buy a house or have a kid. I was like, well, I'm not having a kid, buy a house. And it was the smartest thing I've ever done, because right before COVID, when we started hearing rumors about it, I mean, I was already down at the shop 7 days a week working, 12 to 14 hours a day. So when I sold my house and moved down to Red Oak, it was the smartest thing I ever did, because when COVID hit and we had nothing the entire second quarter, we would not have survived.
So you downsized.
Very much so.
You downsized. Yeah. So the smartest thing you've done personally was, but that's also a business one as well. You downsized your personal side so that your business could support you, or at least you could support yourself and the business didn't have a cash drain.
Exactly. I have taken care of the business financials a lot better than my personal financials. So the smartest thing with the business was, towards the end of the first year of being in business, trying to beat it into my head to work smarter, not harder. Time is money, and that is a real statement. So at the end of the first year, right when we started talking to that exotic wood importer, realizing that flattening slabs by hand is a no-go at this point. I mean, so I dropped like $22,000 on a piece of equipment from Australia called a Wood Whiz. And to give you perspective, um, that 14 by 5 foot walnut table that we did at the very beginning, it took me 3 weeks just to flatten all three slabs by hand. With that machine, I can flatten an 18-foot slab by almost 4 to 5 feet in width in about 3 hours with no labor.
Oh, wow. So what some of the smartest things you've done is invest in your business in the tools and the technology to allow you to be much more productive. And that also allows you to be much more of a lean organization because it's just you, right? You and your buddy who's also doing the woodworking, but he's a solopreneur as well, because I think you had said he's a firefighter, right?
Yeah, yeah, and he's actually not a part of the Right Edge. He has his own separate LLC just for the metalwork. So he does the metalwork. I do all the woodwork and handle all the business. So it's best of both worlds for both of us. I see a lot of companies in my arena that either try to get rich way too fast to where their quality dramatically suffers. They want to outgrow themselves by bringing on employees, thinking that, well, if we bring on X amount of people to speed up production, then we can take on more jobs and, outturn more product. Kind of not how it works if your price point is here and your overhead is here. I don't think a lot of people really outweigh or take the chance to really weigh overhead. And let's just say you have a rough month. Now you got to go pull a business line of credit with a gaudy percent interest return on it. So just for us, everything has been logistics, working smarter, not harder, rather investing in equipment rather than people.
Makes sense. So let's change it. How about the biggest money mistake you've ever made? And tell me that story.
Biggest money mistake I've ever made personally was not paying off my student loans and some of my credit card debt when I should have. Because I still have that debt and it's a pain in the ass. I really regret when I got the first job in oil and gas, I didn't take the first 2 years of bonuses and actually just push it onto debt. I really wish I would have done that. The worst thing with the business, this is going to be different from the first time you and I spoke, because I've ran the experiment of trying to have a handful of employees. And our most recent employee, she was great at first, but the expectations kind of changed. And I needed somebody to help bring in sales to justify your salary, because every penny you're getting paid is literally made by these two hands. So if you're not bringing in sales and justifying your salary, kind of can't keep you on. Like, I don't need a secretary. I need somebody out there hustling for me while I'm in the shop making this stuff. And she was with us for about 8 months, and it was a great experiment. At first she did really well, and yeah, just looking at how much money that cost me, that's $5,000 a month just in wages. So if I could go back in time and take that money and apply it to somewhere else, I'd rather have, that $40,000.
And that's just in wages. That's not the additional taxes and anything else that comes with it either.
Exactly. And it's just, Everything is a litmus test for us. I have a checklist of things I want to try, and with different employees, bringing them on. Can they help in the shop? So that way, when I have to go talk to a designer or hop on the phone or send an email or an invoice, production doesn't stop. So I mean, we've tried everything at this point, and we still have not found the right formula. But I'm still working on it.
Well, based upon your history, you're going to figure it out. It's just a matter of what iteration it ends up being based on my few conversations I've had with you. You're going to figure it out. It's just a matter of what is it going to look like once you do.
Absolutely. And little segue, when it comes to this kind of stuff, now that I've been in this industry a long time, I have gotten interest from a lot of different people, including investors and, people who own and operate 4 to 5 other businesses. And every now and then they'll want to go have lunch and, tell me how to run my business. They see what I allow them to see on Instagram or the website. They have no idea what the inner workings look like, but, they're like, oh, well, you just need to like mass produce, like 1 or 2 lines of product at a minimal price and I can get you in front of the right person. It's like, no, I don't like that. We're not going to do that. So just sticking to my guns, trusting my gut. And just like you said, like everything else, I will figure it out. I will find the right formula. Just going to take some time. Not, that is the least concern I have.
Makes sense. All right, so that takes me to my mastery question. So what does mastering your finances mean to you?
Freedom.
That's my favorite one.
When I downsized, I have realized I don't need a lot of stuff to be happy. The entrepreneur life is definitely not for everybody. Entrepreneurs are the only people who are willing to work 80 hours a week to avoid working 40 hours for somebody else. But the reason I love this so much is because there are no rules. If I want to pick up and go for 2 to 3 weeks and just disappear in the mountains, as long as we're not going to miss deadlines, I can go. I put freedom and not having a boss above monetary gains, honestly. As long as the business is healthy, my bills are getting paid. This to me, I look at a lot as a long-term investment. I'm setting things up to literally blow up and get really, really big, which they're starting to. The money's going to come. If I want to pull out money from the company, I can. I choose not to because I like the company having freedom to do X, Y, and Z, buy wood from, Thailand, Costa Rica. I just pulled the trigger on some koa and mango slabs from Hawaii and some pecan from Spain. It allows me to do that without having to take out loans and not being tied to anybody. I love the freedom. That's what I feel in my heart.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And that's a theme. I hear freedom a lot in that question. And that's really what a lot of us solopreneurs and entrepreneurs, when we leave that, like you said, we're the only group of people who will work 80 hours to avoid a 40-hour a week job. And it's the freedom. It's the freedom that just makes all of this so much better and so worth it. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. One of the things I want to have is I want to have people to be able to find you. Where can people find you so they can see the work? And I have to tell you guys, take a look at his website. His work is amazing. And so we got a website, we got Instagram. How do people find you, Doc?
Instagram is at the Wright Edge, and that's right with the W, so WRIGHT. And the website's the same, www.thewrightedge.com. And if you're not on Instagram, you can go on LinkedIn and just search for me personally, Doc Wright, and you'll be able to see all of our projects and all the crazy places we get to go install.
That's awesome. Absolutely awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Not off the top of my head.
Nah, sounds good. All right. Hey, thanks for being on. I really appreciate it, Doc.
No, thanks for having me on, Gabe. I really appreciate the conversation.
Hey, solopreneurs, I really hope you enjoyed that conversation with Doc. And I really, truly hope you went to his website to check his stuff out. If you haven't, go to his website, www.thewrightedge, and that's WRIGHT edge.com. Check out his stuff. If you have somebody who could benefit from seeing his website with all of his stuff that could possibly find a place to put his art that he puts together, please check it out. And Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I truly appreciate you continuing to listen. If you would please go to my website and subscribe to the resources so that you can get more information on how to run your business better, how to run your personal life better, your financial life, and really create the life that you want. I've got some great tools there for you. So please go subscribe. And one more call to action, share this with a friend. Thanks a lot for listening.